There's a routine most people fall into without ever questioning it. Wake up, go to work, push through the day, come home exhausted, repeat. At first it feels necessary, even responsible. But over time, it begins to feel like something else, like you're moving but not actually getting anywhere. You tell yourself, this is just how life works, that everyone is tired, that everyone sacrifices. And for a while, that belief keeps you going. But there's a quiet moment, usually when everything slows down, where a different thought appears. Is this really all there is? That question is easy to ignore. You push it aside, focus on what needs to be done, keep following the same pattern, but it doesn't disappear. It lingers in the background, growing stronger each time you feel drained. Each time you realize how much effort is being used just to maintain the same place. Because working constantly is not the same as building something. One consumes your time, the other multiplies it. And if you never make that distinction, you can spend years perfecting a system that only keeps you running in circles. That's where most people get stuck, not because they lack discipline, but because they've been trained to value effort over direction, to believe that working harder is always the answer, even when that effort is not leading anywhere new. And over time, that belief creates a pattern, a cycle where your energy is spent daily, but nothing accumulates beyond it. You move, but you don't advance. You produce, but you don't gain control. The hardest part is, from the outside, everything looks fine. You're responsible, you're consistent, you're doing what's expected. But internally, there's a growing awareness that something is missing. Not success, but freedom. Because freedom doesn't come from constant effort. It comes from how that effort is directed. From whether what you're doing today continues to work for you tomorrow or disappears the moment you stop. Most people never stop to ask that question. They stay focused on the next task, the next deadline, the next responsibility. And while that keeps life moving, it doesn't change its direction. It keeps everything exactly where it is. But there comes a point where that becomes impossible to ignore, where you start to see the long-term result of the path you're on. And if that result doesn't align with what you truly want, something inside you begins to resist it. That resistance is not a problem, it's a signal. A signal that the way you've been operating no longer fits the life you want to create. A signal that effort alone is not enough, that something deeper needs to shift. And that shift begins with how you think. Because the moment you stop asking, what do I need to get through today? And start asking, what am I building that will last beyond today? Everything changes. Your focus sharpens. Your decisions become more intentional. You begin to see your time differently. You start to notice how much of it is being exchanged, how much of it is being consumed without creating anything lasting. And once you see that clearly, it becomes harder to accept. But change doesn't happen instantly. It starts with awareness, then moves into action. Small at first, almost unnoticeable. But over time, those actions begin to shift your direction. They begin to create something that doesn't disappear when the day ends. That's when things begin to feel different. Not easier, but more aligned. You're no longer just working to maintain, you're working to build. And that difference changes how you approach everything, because you begin to realize something important. You were never meant to spend your life running in a cycle that leads nowhere. You were meant to create something that grows beyond your effort, something that continues even when you step back. But that only happens if you decide to move differently, if you decide to reject the pattern that keeps you busy but not progressing. If you decide that the ending you're heading toward is not the one you're willing to accept, because if nothing changes, the outcome remains the same, average, predictable, unquestioned. But if you shift, if you begin to think differently, act differently, build differently, then everything that follows begins to change as well. What you're about to hear will challenge how you see work, effort, and what your life is actually building toward. It will push you to look beyond the routine and into something far more intentional. And if you stay with it, you may begin to understand something clearly, that the path you've been on is not fixed, and the ending you've been heading toward is still yours to rewrite. There is a condition into which many men fall, not by intention, but by gradual acceptance. It does not appear as failure, nor does it resemble defeat in any visible form. Instead, it presents itself as diligence, as responsibility, as the willingness to do what must be done. Yet beneath this appearance lies a pattern that, if left unexamined, binds a man to motion without advancement. A man rises each day and applies himself with effort. He fulfills his duties, meets his obligations, and continues with consistency. To those observing from the outside, he appears disciplined and reliable. There is no indication of disorder, no sign of neglect, yet within this steady motion there is often an absence of increase. This absence is not immediately recognized, for effort, when repeated daily, creates the impression of progress. A man feels that because he is engaged, because he is active, he must be moving forward. Yet activity alone does not ensure advancement. It may produce movement, but movement without direction leads only in circles. Over time, this pattern strengthens. The individual becomes accustomed to the rhythm of exertion. He begins to associate effort with purpose, even when no lasting result is produced. He does not question whether his actions are building something beyond the day. He concerns himself only with completing what is before him. There is a subtle belief that forms in this process. It suggests that working harder will eventually produce a different outcome. It encourages increased effort, extended hours, and greater endurance. Yet if the direction remains unchanged, greater effort only deepens the same condition. This is the invisible trap. A man becomes more efficient at maintaining his position, yet no closer to changing it. He refines his routine, strengthens his discipline, and improves his ability to continue. Yet the result remains largely the same. He is moving, but he is not advancing. There are many examples of individuals who have lived within this pattern for years. They have given their time faithfully, applied their energy consistently, and fulfilled every expectation placed upon them. Yet when they pause to examine their position, they find that little has accumulated beyond what was required to continue. To others, such individuals are often admired. They are seen as dependable, as tireless, as committed. Their effort is recognized, their consistency respected. Yet admiration does not equate to advancement. A man may be praised for his endurance while remaining confined within the same limits. The difficulty lies in the fact that this condition does not produce immediate discomfort. It is stable. It allows life to continue without disruption. It provides enough to sustain, enough to maintain, and enough to avoid urgency. And because there is no urgency, there is seldom examination. Yet there are moments when the mind becomes still, when the noise of daily activity fades, and a different awareness emerges. In these moments, a man may begin to question whether his effort is leading him toward anything greater. He may sense that while he is doing much, he is not building much. This awareness, though quiet, is significant. It is the beginning of understanding. It reveals that effort alone is not sufficient. It suggests that something is missing, not discipline, not willingness, but direction. The individual may attempt to dismiss this thought. He may return to his routine, reassure himself that persistence will produce result, and continue as before. Yet the thought does not disappear. It returns, each time slightly stronger, each time more difficult to ignore. There is a reason for this persistence. The mind recognizes patterns, even when they are not consciously examined. It observes that the same actions produce the same results. It understands at a deeper level that continuation without change cannot produce a different outcome. At this stage, the individual stands at a point of quiet decision. He may continue within the pattern, refining his ability to endure, or he may begin to question the direction of his effort. This decision is seldom dramatic. It occurs within thought before it appears in action. There is an affirmation that may be introduced at this moment. I refuse to spend my strength on effort that leaves no lasting result. This statement is not a rejection of work, but a redefinition of its purpose. It directs attention away from activity alone and toward outcome. As this idea takes hold, the individual begins to observe his actions differently. He no longer measures his day solely by what he has completed, but by what has been created. He asks whether his effort has produced something that remains, or whether it has been consumed entirely in the process. This question alters perception. Tasks that once seemed necessary are now examined for their contribution. Actions that produce no lasting effect begin to lose their importance. The individual becomes more selective, more deliberate, and more aware. There may be resistance in this process. Habit is strong, and the comfort of familiarity is not easily abandoned. The individual may feel uncertain in questioning what he has long accepted. Yet, this uncertainty is the beginning of change, not a signal to retreat. Others may begin to notice a difference. The individual appears less concerned with constant activity and more focused upon meaningful effort. He is no longer driven solely by completion, but by creation. This shift, though subtle, changes how he is perceived. Where once he was seen as tireless, he is now seen as thoughtful. Where once he was known for endurance, he is now recognized for direction. His actions carry greater weight, not because he does more, but because he does what matters. It must be understood that this change does not reduce effort, it refines it. The individual continues to work, but with greater intention. He applies his energy where it produces result, and withdraws it where it does not. Through this, his effort becomes more effective. There is a gradual realization that emerges from this process. The individual begins to see that exhaustion is not always the result of meaningful work. It is often the result of misdirected work effort applied without return, energy spent without accumulation. This realization is powerful, for it changes the objective. The goal is no longer to work until one is exhausted, but to work in such a way that effort produces something that continues. The measure of a day is no longer how much was done, but what remains. Examples of such transformation may be seen in those who have shifted from constant labor to intentional creation. They did not cease working, but they changed the nature of their work. They began to build rather than merely to perform. Others observe these individuals and perceive something different. They are no longer defined by how hard they work, but by what their work produces. They appear more controlled, more deliberate, and less confined by the demands of constant effort. Thus, the invisible trap begins to lose its hold. The individual, having recognized it, can no longer remain within it unconsciously. He begins to direct his effort, to question his actions, and to seek results that extend beyond the moment. And so, it may be said that the first step is not to do more, but to see more clearly. To recognize that effort without increase is not progress, but repetition. To understand that movement without direction is not advancement, but continuation. The man who sees this does not abandon effort. He elevates it. He transforms it from something that sustains him to something that builds for him. And in that transformation, his path begins to change. There is a truth seldom considered, though it governs every man's life more completely than he realizes. It is this: money is not his primary resource. Time, expressed through energy, is. Money may be gained, lost, and regained. But the energy a man expends in each hour is drawn from a supply that does not return. Yet most men do not think in these terms. They measure their effort by what they receive at the end of the week, rather than by what they have given in order to receive it. They focus upon income, while overlooking the greater exchange, the portion of life that was required to produce it. Each day, a man rises and gives his attention, his strength, and his thought to the tasks before him. These are not small things. They are the very substance of his life. Yet when these are given repeatedly without creating anything that endures, the exchange becomes unbalanced. This imbalance does not reveal itself immediately. It is hidden within routine. A man becomes accustomed to giving his energy daily, and because he continues to function, he assumes that all is well. Yet beneath this continuation lies a gradual depletion, not of strength alone, but of opportunity. For each hour spent in effort that produces no lasting return is an hour that cannot be reclaimed. It is not merely time that has passed, but potential that has not been converted into something that remains. And over years, this accumulation becomes significant. There are many who reach a stage where they feel a certain weight, though they cannot always explain it. It is not simply fatigue. It is the realization that much has been given, yet little has been built. That energy has been spent faithfully, yet without producing something that continues beyond the moment. This realization is often accompanied by resistance. A man may feel unwilling to continue in the same manner, yet uncertain how to proceed differently. He senses that something is misaligned, but has not yet identified what must change. The cause lies in the placement of his energy. It has been directed toward maintaining rather than multiplying, toward fulfilling rather than building. And while these actions are necessary in part, they cannot be the whole, or the result remains unchanged. There is a distinction that must be understood. Effort that is consumed produces immediate return, then disappears. Effort that is directed produces return that continues. The former sustains the present. The latter shapes the future. Many men are trained to give their energy in a manner that produces only immediate result. They are taught to complete tasks, to meet expectations, and to remain consistent. These are valuable qualities, yet without direction towards something that endures, they create a cycle that repeats without expansion. Consider the individual who has worked for many years with diligence. He has given his energy faithfully, yet when he pauses, he finds that his condition is largely dependent upon his continued effort. The moment he stops, the flow ceases. Nothing remains to carry forward without him. In contrast, there are those who at some point recognize this imbalance. They begin to ask a different question, not, "What must I do today?" but "What will this effort create beyond today?" This question changes everything. There is an affirmation that may guide this shift. My energy is too valuable to be spent without creating something that remains. This statement introduces a new standard. It requires that effort be measured not only by completion, but by continuation. As this idea takes hold, the individual begins to see his actions differently. He observes where his energy is being spent, and more importantly, what it produces. He begins to distinguish between what disappears and what accumulates. There may be discomfort in this awareness. The individual may see clearly that much of his effort has been consumed without lasting effect. Yet this recognition is not cause for regret. It is cause for redirection. Others who have undergone this realization often describe a moment of clarity. They did not immediately change everything. Instead, they began to redirect a portion of their energy. They reserved time and thought for creating something that would endure, even in small measure. At first, the results were not dramatic. The new effort required attention, learning, and adjustment. It did not immediately replace the old pattern. Yet it introduced something new, a sense of building rather than merely maintaining. As this process continued, the individual began to experience a different relationship with his energy. It was no longer something that was entirely consumed each day. A portion of it was being converted into something that would remain, something that would grow. Others begin to notice this shift. They see a man who is no longer giving all of himself to immediate demands. He appears more selective, more intentional, and more aware of where his energy is placed. This perception changes how he is regarded. Where once he was seen as simply hardworking, he is now seen as thoughtful. Where once he gave without distinction, he now directs with purpose. His effort carries greater weight, not because it is greater in quantity, but because it is greater in effect. There is also a change in how he experiences his own work. It no longer feels as though each day must begin again from the same point. There is a sense of accumulation, of progress that continues. This changes not only his results, but his outlook. It must be understood that this shift requires discipline. The demands of immediate life do not disappear. Responsibilities remain, and effort is still required. Yet within these conditions, the individual must choose to direct a portion of his energy differently. This choice, repeated over time, creates a new pattern. The individual begins to build alongside his obligations. He is no longer confined entirely to what must be done. He is also engaged in what will continue. There is a gradual strengthening that occurs. The portion of his effort that produces lasting result begins to grow. What was once small becomes more significant. What was once uncertain becomes more defined. Others may begin to see this as progress, though they may not fully understand its cause. They observe that the individual is no longer in the same condition. He appears to be moving beyond the cycle, not through greater effort, but through different application. Thus, the misplacement of life energy begins to be corrected. The individual no longer gives without return. He directs, builds, and accumulates. His effort is no longer consumed entirely, it is converted. And so, it may be said that the true cost of unexamined labor is not fatigue alone, but the loss of what could have been created. The man who recognizes this does not cease to work. He changes what his work produces. He begins to use his energy not only to sustain his life, but to shape it. And in that shift, everything begins to change. There is a belief so deeply accepted that few ever question it, and yet it governs the lives of the majority. It is the belief that if a man works hard enough, long enough, and with enough consistency, he will eventually arrive at freedom. This belief appears reasonable, for effort does produce result. Yet it does not produce the result most men seek. A man may apply himself with great intensity, increase his hours, and refine his skill, and still find that his life remains bound to the same pattern. His income may rise, his responsibilities may grow, yet his dependence upon continued effort does not diminish. He must continue, or the flow ceases. This condition reveals a truth that is often overlooked. Effort produces income, but it does not produce independence. It creates motion, but not release. It allows a man to sustain his position, but not to escape the necessity of constant exertion. There is a limit to what effort alone may achieve. This limit is not imposed by lack of discipline, but by the nature of the exchange itself. When a man trades his time directly for return, he is bound to the quantity of time he possesses. No matter how great his effort, he cannot exceed this boundary. Many attempt to overcome this limitation by increasing their effort. They work longer, take on more, and push themselves further. For a time, this produces greater return, yet it also produces greater exhaustion. The increase is temporary, and the cost is high. There comes a moment, often after years of such effort, when a man begins to recognize this pattern. He sees that no matter how much he does, he must continue doing it. There is no point at which the effort ceases while the return remains. The cycle persists. This realization may produce discomfort. It challenges the belief that has guided his actions for so long. It suggests that the path he has followed, though honorable, may not lead to the outcome he desires. And in this suggestion lies the beginning of a new understanding. Freedom is not the result of continued labor, it is the result of construction. It comes not from doing more, but from building something that continues when the doing stops. This distinction is subtle, yet it changes everything. Consider the individual who spends his entire life exchanging effort for return. Each day begins at the same point. Each result is consumed, and each effort must be repeated. There is no accumulation beyond what is immediately required. His life is sustained, but not expanded. Now consider the individual who begins to apply his effort differently. He still works, yet he directs a portion of his energy toward creating something that endures. It may be small at first, uncertain in its outcome, yet it possesses one quality that distinguishes it. It continues. Over time, this continuation becomes significant. What was once dependent upon his immediate effort begins to produce without it. The individual sees, perhaps for the first time, that his effort has created something beyond itself. It has extended. This extension is the foundation of freedom. It allows a man to step back without losing everything he has built. It creates space, not through absence of work, but through presence of structure. It replaces constant exertion with ongoing result. There is an affirmation which may be applied to strengthen this understanding. I no longer depend on effort alone. I build that which continues beyond me. This statement marks a shift in thinking. It redirects attention from activity to outcome, from labor to construction. As this idea takes hold, the individual begins to question his previous approach. He asks not only how much he is doing, but what it is creating. He examines whether his effort ends with the day or whether it extends beyond it. This examination produces clarity. The individual begins to see that much of what he has done, though necessary, has not contributed to lasting result. It has sustained him, but not freed him. This recognition is not discouraging, it is instructive. Others who have reached this point often describe a change in focus. They do not abandon effort, but they redirect it. They begin to place value upon what continues rather than what is consumed. They build, even while they work. At first, this shift may seem slow. The results of construction are not immediate. They require time, consistency, and refinement. Yet, unlike effort alone, they accumulate. Each step builds upon the last, creating something that grows. Others begin to notice this difference. They observe a man who is no longer entirely bound to his daily exertion. He appears more deliberate, more controlled, and less driven by immediate demand. This perception alters how he is regarded. Where once he was seen as hardworking, he is now seen as strategic. Where once his value was measured by effort, it is now measured by outcome. His actions carry greater significance, for they produce more than they consume. There is also a change in how he experiences his own life. The constant pressure to produce diminishes. The fear of stopping lessens. He begins to see that his effort is no longer the sole source of his return. This realization brings a sense of stability that effort alone cannot provide. It must be understood that this shift requires patience. The habit of relying solely upon effort is strong. The individual may feel uncertain in directing his actions towards something less immediate. Yet with persistence, the new pattern becomes established. Examples of such transformation may be seen in those who have built enterprises, systems, or structures that continue beyond their presence. They did not achieve this through greater effort alone, but through different application. They constructed rather than merely performed. Others often describe these individuals as fortunate, yet their results are not accidental. They are the product of decision, applied consistently over time. They chose to build, and through that choice, they altered their condition. Thus, the illusion begins to dissolve. The belief that effort alone leads to freedom is replaced with understanding. The individual sees that freedom must be created, not earned through endurance. He no longer seeks to do more of the same. He seeks to do something different. He applies his energy with intention, directing it toward what will remain. And so the cycle begins to break, not through the absence of work, but through the transformation of it. For the man who understands this no longer measures his life by how much he does each day. He measures it by what his effort leaves behind. And in that measure, freedom begins. There is no lasting transformation in a man's outward condition until there is first a transformation in the manner in which he thinks. For thought is the origin of all action, and action, repeated over time, determines result. If a man continues to think in the same pattern, he will continue to act in the same pattern regardless of his intentions. Most men, without realizing it, think in terms of maintenance. Their thoughts are directed toward what must be done today, what must be completed, what must be preserved. They ask themselves how to manage, how to sustain, how to continue. And because their thinking is framed in this way, their results reflect it. This form of thinking is not without value. It creates order, prevents loss, and allows life to proceed without disruption. Yet it does not create expansion. It maintains what exists, but it does not build beyond it. It keeps a man in motion, but within a fixed boundary. The man who seeks to move beyond this condition must alter the nature of his thinking. He must begin to think in terms of multiplication. He must ask not only what must be done today, but what this day's effort will produce in the future. He must shift from immediate necessity to lasting effect. This shift is not automatic. The mind, having been trained through repetition, returns to familiar patterns. It prefers to solve what is in front of it rather than consider what lies beyond it. Therefore, the individual must deliberately introduce new questions, new considerations, and new standards for his thinking. There is a powerful question that marks the beginning of this transformation. Will what I am doing today continue to serve me tomorrow? This question directs attention beyond the present moment. It forces the individual to consider the outcome of his actions, not merely their completion. As this question is repeated, it begins to influence decision. Actions that once seemed necessary are now examined for their lasting value. The individual begins to distinguish between what must be done and what should be built. This distinction is subtle, yet it alters direction. There is an affirmation which supports this reorientation. I think in terms of growth, and my actions follow that direction. This statement reinforces the connection between thought and result. It reminds the individual that expansion begins in the mind before it appears in reality.